Hi, I'm Katie with Modern Textiles, and today I'm going to go over the basics of foundation paper piecing, which is commonly referred to as FPP. Alright, so to just get started, I'm going to be showing you guys how to do a little bit of foundation paper piecing with my Around the Kitchen pattern, which includes a little wall hanging as well as a table runner. The first thing you're going to want to do whenever you get a paper copy of a paper piecing pattern is make sure to take copies of the paper pieces. Just so that way you can go ahead and keep making this pattern over and over if you want to, because if you use the originals, you don't have anything to get them back. If you got a digital copy, then it's easy enough. You can just continue to print them as you need them. So I've already gone ahead and printed off extra copies of my pattern. And what we're going to do is then, after you have your copies, step number one, make those copies. Keep the originals, maybe even put on there with a highlighter, just master. The nice thing about writing with like a yellow highlighter on your master copies is it won't show up when you do your copying. So the tools that we need with foundation paper piecing is a little different. I'm just going to give you the starter pack of what I bought when I first started learning. One, I got a wooden seam roller. It's just really handy to press your seams quickly without having to heat up the iron, going back and forth between your pressing station and whatnot. I also have an add a quarter ruler. So I have the 12-inch one. That was what was available at my local quilt shop at the time, so that's what I went with. The nice thing about the add a quarter ruler is you can see there is that 1/4-inch ledge right here. Is just really easy to see through, and that way you know whenever you're trimming excess off, you got a 1/4-inch seam. I personally like to just have a small rotary mat and then my regular rotary tool. And then the other thing is when you get into, say you really enjoy paper piecing, foundation paper piecing, or even if you like doing anything that requires some sort of backlight, this is kind of one of those things you step up into. You don't buy this as the starter pack. This is going to be a Caterpillar light board. I really like this one because I've got a pretty massive paper piecing project coming up, and it's just nice being able to have a backlight where you can see through this, because you'll notice when we start paper piecing, if you don't have this, you'll be holding up to your sun or to the light to make sure that you've got overlap on your fabrics when you're sewing onto your paper piecing pages. I've been doing paper piecing. I have a reason to have this. This is a pretty expensive buy. They do come in multiple sizes. I went for the largest one because I do have, like I said, I'm going to be doing a Pride and Joy Joan of Arc quilt coming up. And I knew having this when I'm working at night, especially we're getting closer to winter here, our days are really short. I'm not going to have the sunlight to really use as a backlight for paper piecing and making sure I've got enough overage and coverage on my paper piecing fabric. So I'll show you how to use that, as well as, like I said, you can always use the alternative holding up to a window or holding up to a light, or maybe you have just a desk lamp that you could also hold up to and make sure you have that transparency through there. A couple other things that are really handy to have is going to be your needle. So you're going to want to go for a smaller, sharper needle. So an 80-12 universal or a 90-14 universal, really handy. Also a Microtex is just fine too. That way when you are poking through the paper, it's going to be really precise holes when you're sewing through your... The other thing we're going to want to do before we take a seat at our sewing machine is bring our sewing machine adjustments in. So when it comes to paper piecing, you're going to want to have your stitch length between a 1.2 and a 1.8. That way, when you go to rip off all the paper on the backside, it gives a really good perforation and your stitches are going to hold everything in place. So kind of dual purpose, really make sure that when you're pulling the paper out, you don't have any loose stitches or rip stitches, as well as it perforates your paper a lot more. All right, so I went ahead and pulled some fabrics from just my scrap bins. I'm going to be making this cute aloe vera plant that is in the pattern here. It's going to require 3 different greens, background fabric, and then a fabric for the planter that you're putting the aloe vera in. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and cut out these 3 squares. So the main thing is you want to keep this exterior perimeter intact, because this will be acting as your seam when you sew it into the project, the final project, as well as when you sew these 3 pieces together to make the aloe vera plant. I'm gonna grab my, got a handy, so this rotary tool has a really dulled blade, so I like to just use that when I'm cutting paper. Our 3 pieces for this block for around the kitchen pattern, I'm going to go ahead and work on the first one, which is D. So within this block there's D, E, and F. So I'm going to set these 2 other ones aside, and we're going to focus on D. So with that, I'm going to grab my number 1 and number 2, so you can see everything is numbered off within block D. So we have number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that is going to be the order in which you will be sewing each of your foundation paper pieces on to the block here. So I'm going to grab my background for number 2, and then this is going to be my number 1 fabric, which is this green. And with the green, I'm going to go ahead and just line that up with my outside edge of the paper. So that way I have a 1/4 inch seam here, or a 1/4 inch seam right here. And then you can see I've got more than enough to cover off there. I'm just going to go ahead and pin this in place. That way I know it's not moving. Your other option is to use a glue stick and just glue that. So just a heads up, I've got my right side facing away from the paper, so wrong sides together for the paper. And then I've got my white speckled fabric, which is going to be right sides together. So with this, essentially, you'll see I've got this black line here, your black line here. We're going to be sewing right on that black line. So I want to make sure that I will sew from this corner of the paper straight down and a 1/4 inch past into number 3 there. So that way I've got a full seam and there's no chance of me breaking any type of stitches when I start pulling paper out, as well as that I've got full seams when the block is complete. So this is kind of where you have to start using your brain and make sure you're thinking your steps through, is because I'm doing right sides together, my 1/4 inch seam will be on the number 2 side of that line, right? So I've got my 1/4 inch seam. I'm just going to go ahead and use this grid lines right here. And then, so each grid line is a 1/4 inch. And you can kind of see it through there on the light pad that I've got more than a 1/4 inch seam right there. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead. I'm actually going to shift this up just to make sure when I fold this back, I'm covering all that background location. I'm going to go ahead and stitch from each point to point of the highlighter I made, and I'll come back and show you. So we're stitching with the paper up or our fabric down on the machine. So I'm just going to go ahead and clip this off too. So I just got back from the machine. You can see I got black stitching right on top of that existing line that was on the paper, and then I went all the way to the pink with my stitching. We're just going to open this up quick and see that my white is all the way over, which is great. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do, beveled edge of my add a 1/4 ruler right here. I'm going to use that for folding this paper back. So go right there, and with using a smaller stitch length too, it kind of becomes perforated. All right, and now I'm going to go ahead and use this little lip with this side down and just hook that right on to the paper and trim my 1/4 inch. So we have a lot of excess here, which is okay. The nice thing with the Caterpillar cutting mat on here, I can just go ahead and cut straight away on the cutting mat or on the light pad without having any issues. All right, so took away the excess of my first fabric. And then we're going to go ahead and use my little handy dandy roller here to roll this seam back. You can see my green shifted a little bit. That's okay. We're still in that 1/4 inch allowance, right? So especially when you're starting to get into foundation paper piecing, just allow for extra fabric so that way you know you're going to be covering all your parts best you can. So really, if I wanted to, I could have shifted that whole grain piece. I had plenty over just to ensure, and I would just trim off at the end of this. So looking here, we've got all the background is covered. Fantastic. Now we're going to be going between the 2 and 3 piece, right? So we're going to be sewing right on this line. And because there is no stop in the seam on the actual block itself, we'll just sew from edge to edge on this paper piece. So here's my new one. We're going to be going right here. So that way, I'm going to go up a little bit. Perfect. And now we'll sew from that pink dot I made all the way to the other pink dot. All right, so we've had our 3rd piece added to this. So you can see my black seam right on top of that printed line. Here's the back of it. And what I'll do, just make sure we can fold it. You see I'm covering that outside. We don't have any gaps in my seam, which is fabulous. Now, getting my add a 1/4 ruler, using that beveled edge again. We're gonna go ahead and just fold that paper back. And this is where one of the parts, which is just fine. So I back stitch a little bit here. This is where you just tear those out. And then that way you can trim away the excess. So I back stitch whenever I have leftover stitches inside the block and I'm going that 1/4 inch past. I would just do a couple of back stitches just to make sure we don't have any broken stitches there. Now to turn over and hook that lip right onto the paper, trim, leaving that 1/4 inch seam. We'll fold back, we'll come back here, roll that seam out. You can go ahead and press it at your pressing station if you'd like. I just prefer having everything right here. And then we're going to move on to our next background piece. So got a piece right here. Actually, it's this one. So this is going to be, once again, right sides together. And now I'm going to go ahead and we're going to be sewing between 3 and 4. So right on this line, once again, we've got a seam that doesn't go to the end of the paper. So we're going to want to sew to a 1/4 inch in, and we'll go all the way past here to make that straight line. So we're going to want this to end up being like this, right? So it's another way to look at it. And just make sure we fine tune it here on the other side, which sometimes it's a little tough to see, but you can see there's a shadow right there. We got plenty of space, so we'll go ahead and sew that on. So once again, we've got that seam. I started off a little wonky, that's okay, it's in the seam allowance. And then I've gone ahead and just ripped that seam we made between 2 and 3 there. I'm gonna go ahead and just fold this back. Once again, if you like, you can double check too to make sure, so we can see the outline of my block is right there. I'm fully covered. So that's pressed back. Now, making sure we have that folded so it's right sides together still. We don't want to trim off the thing we just sewed on. We just want to trim the seam allowance down. Come back here. And then we'll continue to roll. We're almost done with this one portion of a 3-part block. All right, now we're going to be sewing the next plant piece, which I've got this darker green. So very similar So we know we want that to be here. So just making sure we've got enough fabric. Fabulous. So it's gonna be something like that. And then we'll come in and fine tune it to make sure we got enough of a 1/4 inch seam to trim off, which is great. And this one, we're sewing from corner or edge to edge of the block. So we don't need to do that stop at 1/4 inch pass. All right, simple. We're in the home stretch. One more seam after this. Double check. Looks great. We got plenty access. So what we're gonna do, fold this back. Once again, we got that, there we go, that seam that was overlapping there. It's fine. All right. We're still right sides together. On our last piece, now we'll go ahead and trim to a 1/4 inch seam. Roll that seam out. Wonderful. Now on to the last piece, which is just a little small background piece, which we got more than enough. So right sides together. It's tough when you got those colored fabrics in there. A little difficult to see. That is where we want to be. Sometimes if you want, you could always move this healing mat off, and that way you just have direct light. For the most part, I'm pretty good with just being able to spot that shadow there on the light. All right, now I'm just checking to make sure we're on the block fully. We're good there. We're gonna trim though, that 1/4 inch allowance. Roll that seam. Perfect. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to trim this entire block. So go to the back side here. Going to keep that 1/4 inch seam allowance. So the paper, we're just going to trim to the edge of the paper. Almost trimmed my finger. Didn't, thankfully, so keep an eye out for that. Wonderful. So the main thing is, before you peel any paper, complete your project first, okay? These lines, this interior rectangle, is going to be your seam allowance that you're going to be sewing on those seams, on those lines. So make sure, do not peel any paper until you're complete with your project. That's when you want to start tearing paper out, once you know everything is complete. You've got sound seams and all that good stuff. So I'm going to speed up the next portion. I'm going to work on part E, and then to part F, and then we'll come back and we'll sew those together. All right, now that we have all 3 pieces of this block paper piece, you're now gonna go ahead and piece the block together. So just like you would on the internal, the smaller paper pieces, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. For my pattern, you'll now just correlate the letters. So D and E will go together first. I'm just gonna go ahead, clip these together. And then you'll actually just sew right on this 1/4 inch seam, okay? So right here from edge to edge of the blocks. All right, now what I'll do is I'm just gonna go ahead, hold these open, and then I'm just gonna seam press this open. This would be a good time since we're at the internal seam here, is to just peel this 1/4 inch seam out. Otherwise you're gonna have a tough time trying to pull it out once the project's complete. And I'm just doing this 1/4 inch seam because I'm gonna be pressing it open, which once again, having that high or that very low stitch count is important. It makes it a lot easier to get that paper out. Okay, so now I have D and E together, right? The black is showing. Now I'm gonna go ahead and do the same for F. So I'm gonna go ahead and I like to make sure any pieces that have seams, I like to sew with that on top, just so I can make sure those seams stay open. Clip, clip, make sure everything looks good on this side. All right, and same with this one. Just gonna go ahead and fold them back and forth, and then we will take that seam paper right out. Perfect. And there you have it. You've got your completed foundation paper piecing block. Then moving from there, you continue with your pattern. And once again, removing only the seams as you go along, but then leave the bulk of the paper in place so that way you can follow your 1/4 inch seam allowance. And in the next video, I'm going to give you a walkthrough of my Juki 18 QVP.